Welcome everyone to another episode of Behind the Human. I'm your host, Mark Champagne. And as you know, it's my job to unpack the stories, mental fitness practices of people living at the top of their game personally and professionally. For longtime listeners, typically this is where I inject a one or two liner bio statement to introduce the guest. But in this case, I felt that Jonny's words were probably the most appropriate to provide a bit of context of where he's coming from, where his expertise originated, like what he's interested in. It's just really well written as the other element. So here are Jonny's words. My journey into nervous system mastery began when my fiance suffered an anxiety attack that led to her taking her own life. In the years since, I've invested tens of thousands of dollars and half a decade exploring my nervous system. Extended meditation retreats, nature-based vision quests, neurofeedback clinics, psychedelic ceremonies, hundreds of breathwork journeys, and 10 days in a dark room. Alongside this inner journey, I spent thousands of hours researching, training, and mentoring high performers, from the CEO of a rocket ship company to startup founders recovering from burnout to busy parents attempting to stay afloat amidst the chaos of raising a family. It's just so beautifully written, Jonny. I had to start there. And I should also mention, Jonny leads a beautiful 5-week boot camp for the nervous system called Nervous System Mastery, and also hosts the popular podcast, Curious Humans. So Jonny, welcome to the show.
It's so great to be here, Mark. Yeah, I'm so excited for this.
Me too. I mean, we met, I guess, a month or so ago now. I have to think back of who the mutual connection was, but
Dave from Holstey or Dave or Mike from
yeah,
Holstey?
you're right. Which we should, there's a lot of journalers on the line actually, and anyone that is using that product or isn't, should check it out. They just released a pretty cool AI guided integration into their journaling app, where I think it's the first of its kind, where it's a two-way conversation. It's not just, hey, here are themes coming up from your journals, but you can actually get into some insight and whatnot. And I mean, we're biased, of course, because we know David well, but I mean, it's such a great team over there, and they've really been at it for the long term, which is really nice to see. So, a little side note there. But anyway, sorry, a bit of a tangent. When we first met, I mean, I feel like we hit it off right away. There's a lot of synergies in terms of, us doing everything possible to get our minds to work for us and instead of against us. And I'm just so excited to jump in because you have so many different mental fitness flows and practices and rituals that I feel like some of them I've tapped into, and I'm sure some of the listeners have, but there's like a level of depth that I feel like you go to that most, including myself, don't. And I can't wait to jump into all of that. So with that said, though, you might know, I mean, we're going to skip to pause all of that for a second. And also I'm going to, release the bio and the one-liners and your description of your work, just to start this off with the same question everyone gets. And that's, who are you?
I mean, that is perhaps the question. With the bio that you just read kind of in the back of my mind, I feel like who I am has been through these cycles or these chapters. And I feel like the person, the human I am today is very different to who I was in my early 20s and very different to who I was in my teenage years. I think that's broadly a healthy thing. And I think that all of us go through these cycles, these like death, rebirth processes. But yeah, I mean, right now I'm proud to be a husband, aspiring father, hopefully in the next year or so. Recovering Brit.
I love that.
Living in the US, I facilitate breathwork, which I enjoy immensely. Podcaster, kind of voracious lover of great questions like yourself. I think that's partly why we hit it off so well.
Yeah.
And I would say the kind of the broad arc of the last 5 or 6 years of my life has been directing that curiosity inwards to kind of like the inner landscape. And I almost have this image of like I don't know if you've seen the 16th century maps, that where, before like the US and parts of the world were discovered, there was this like, here be dragons kind of like written all over the maps. And I feel like most of the world has been discovered right today. We have Google Maps, but the real terra incognita, the here be dragons territory, is like the inner landscape. And so I think that's what I've been directing my kind of adventurous curiosity to exploring, and just like voraciously and somewhat obsessively trying modalities, practices, entheogens, conversations, everything I can kind of explore to, yeah, just keep exploring. And I hope that that journey doesn't end. Like it's really
Yeah,
fun.
for sure. It is. I mean, I resonate so much. Even the time frame, frankly. I mean, my wife and
Mm,
I kind of joke that 6, 7 years ago we were just completely different people, and not
mhm.
saying that it from a place of any judgment, whether that's good or bad, but just different. And
Yeah.
we're like, thank God we evolved or changed together because I can see how that
Yeah. Oh,
wouldn't have
totally.
worked out.
Yeah.
Because it just, the professions, the things we were doing, even, kind of the people we're hanging out with, just so vastly different
Mm,
than who we are today. And it's taken a lot of work, of course, to go through that. And like you, I'm pretty like, I feel like I'm excited for the unknown now, whereas it used to
mm,
terrify me
mm,
that, not having that level of certainty and so forth. Whereas if you can somehow shift that perspective, and it's not like that every day, but in general, oh, wow, like there's just so much that we don't
mm,
know
mm.
and so much opportunity. I'm
Yeah.
curious, Johnny, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just my research. You've kind of the big chapters of your life, at least up until now, you spent time in London,
Mm,
Bali, and then you're in Colorado now.
mm,
If you had to pin a color to each of those places,
hmm,
what color would you put there, and why?
hmm. Huh, great question. I would say, no offense to my British friends, but for me, my London chapter was marked with a kind of like gray, lifeless gray color with some kind of pinpricks of accented yellows, maybe.
Hmm,
I would say my Bali chapter was very much like deep blue. That was where I got to really just fall in love with the ocean and surfing, which is my big passion, and that's where I one of the places I feel most alive in the world.
wow.
So Bali would definitely be a blue, and I would say Colorado, which we will be actually leaving in a couple of months to go to Santa Cruz.
Mm,
Colorado feels like a kind of like a like a mountain green, like a deep kind of rooted, strong, yeah, earthy green.
okay. And then I don't wanna put projections in your mind, but what do you think Santa Cruz will be for you?
I hope a mixture of greens and blues. It's one of the few places where like the forests and the mountains meet the ocean. There's the kind
Yeah.
of the giant redwoods and the hills behind Santa Cruz itself. So I'm hoping it's a blend of the 2, and my wife loves being around redwoods. We have a
Oh, yeah.
beautiful retriever that we love, kind of walking, so the combination of, like, the hikes through the redwoods and getting good surf is, like, the dream.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that you're moving, and then I was thinking about what you said about, surf in Bali, and then thinking, like, "Well, he lives in Colorado." It doesn't seem
Mhm,
like
yeah.
I mean, they're equally beautiful, elements with the mountains, and just like
Yeah,
I think you used a beautiful word, the ground, the rooting of the mountains and the grounding that these just huge, huge
mhm,
pieces of rock and stone can do for us. It's
mhm,
so powerful, so powerful. Well, thanks for going there. I mean, a bit of a odd question, but I'm just always curious. I learned that flow. I shouldn't say I learned it because I mean Picasso didn't do this, but I learned this studying Picasso. You have the book, so if you read that chapter, you'll see where it's coming from a little bit more.
mm,
But just this idea of when we take a minute to pause and zoom out and look at our lives, just like if you were to do that with Picasso's body of work, you quickly see, and I didn't know this, that there were all these phases and color phases to his work.
mm,
There was this whole period where his paintings were very much, blues and like dark blues and grays, and like the subjects were looking down, and he had
mm,
lost his best friend
mm,
to suicide.
mm,
And then he met his wife, and all the paintings all of a sudden changed to like greens and yellows and reds, and people were like uplifted and smiling and so forth, and it just made me think, like, first of all, I didn't realize that because I feel like often we look at things right in the chapter, right? Like, we're right in it. But when you zoom out and look at that, like, Picasso's Picasso because of the whole body of work, and we are who we are, at least today, because of all of the chapters and all of that. So it kind of it sparked this idea of like, well, what color would I be in the different phases
Mm.
of life and so forth. So I'm excited for you. I feel like it's such a beautiful evolution.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a I love that reflection. I vaguely remember reading in my philosophy days some of Goethe's color theory, and I think
Okay.
he had, ideas of like the specific impact and meanings of colors. And from the perspective of the nervous system, I often think about how we design our environments and then our environments design us in return. And so the colors that we are around, I mean, right now, my wife, it's like a jungle in our office, like over there. It's just like plants everywhere, greens and
Yeah.
paintings, and that does for sure have an impact. I think there've been studies that show, when they put plants and things in hospitals, it improves outcomes. And yeah, I think it's a really interesting question to be like, what are the colors around me, and what impact are they maybe having on a subconscious level?
Nervous system mastery. Th- Those words, I don't think they've been a part of your vocabulary for your entire life. They're obviously, I know a bit of the context, and we shared a bit of that in the bio. And
Mm,
I mean, share as much as you're comfortable with
mm,
sharing in terms of where all that came from. But I'm curious after that backstory, how did you even start
mm,
studying the nervous system and knowing what I know now? And we'll get into just all these beautiful modalities and what I would call mental fitness routines that can really help any of us at a moment's notice.
mm,
Um, but yeah, but where did it all begin and how did you start? Like it's such a huge topic.
mm. Yeah. Where do I begin? Gosh. So I mean, as context, I studied philosophy at university. I've always been fascinated by questions of human development, human maturation, personal growth. And for a long time, that exploration was very intellectual, reading Nietzsche, reading the Stoics, reading all the kind of greats in the Western canon. And I started getting curious about meditation. I think that was like one entry point, using Headspace back in like 2012 with Andy
Yeah.
Puddicombe, like juggling the balls. I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember that.
Oh yeah.
And that was kind of one, like, oh, this is interesting. I did a yoga teacher training, so kind of learned the impact of pranayama and how breath can kind of shape the quality of our thoughts and the quality of our minds and prepare for meditation. But I would say the real inception point, the kind of call to adventure, so to speak, was the grief chapter that you
Yeah.
mentioned in the bio. And
Yeah.
my fiance Sophie, who we'd been together for just over 4 years, she had bipolar, and really quite out of the blue, she had an anxiety attack at work, came home and overdosed on her own medication whilst I was traveling in Portugal. And that that moment, that kind of period completely, I mean, it kind of self-combusted the identity of who I thought I was at that time. It kind of erased the imagined future that we'd had of, like having kids and moving to Bristol and, the whole like life plan that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
kind of mapped out to some degree. Um, and although it didn't happen obviously instantaneously, in the coming months afterwards, I had this realization that I'd for most of my life, I'd been relatively numb from the neck down, was kind of what came to me. And that, not that I didn't have feelings, but I just wasn't really in touch with my like emotional landscape. And part of that was how I was raised, my parents, being in England, all these things. And so I kind of made this commitment to myself to really explore this. And I'd also met, I don't know if this is true in your experience, but I'd met older people who had lost someone close to them, but they hadn't actually grieved the loss.
Yeah.
And my experience of them as people were these like hollowed out like husks of just there was no aliveness. There was just this like bitter resentment in a way.
Mhm. They were
And
just there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was terrified that that was who I might end up becoming if I just kind of followed the default path, so to speak. And so I, you know, quite radically just like stopped all of the work stuff I was doing, um, and ended up initially traveling to the places that meant the most to me and Sophie. They were almost like these like horcruxes of grief was how I thought about it, in these locations that had been meaningful to us. And as I started going through the grieving process, and in hindsight, I read a lot as you do, and my understanding of the 5 stages of grief that Kubler-Ross talks about is that they are actually 5 different ways in which we deny the energy of grief. There's denial, there's kind of, depression, there's anger, and my sense is that those are 5 ways that the energy of grief in our systems just gets kinked, and it comes out in ways
Yeah.
because it's too much for us to hold and to feel. And so through things like, honestly, mostly breath work, but also there was one moment that really stands out in my mind when I was in a place called Lea Sands in the UK, and her memorial bench is there. And I remember just like as I was approaching it, just feeling this like upswell of intensity in my system. And with every step, it just like increased and increased and increased. And when I finally got to the bench, it was like a Niagara Falls of grief, just like erupted
Oh,
through me. And in that, like tears kind of streaming, there was this really odd sense of like, wow, like if I didn't know that I am supposed to be feeling sad right now, this would feel like feel emotion just talking about it. This would feel like intense ecstasy, like I was on like tripping on MDMA or something like that.
yeah.
And that experience just like it kind of broke my brain a little bit. Like I kind of had this narrative that like, when you're grieving, you're meant to be like mourning and depressed and down and, all these things. And here this like incredible amount of like vibrant energy was coursing through me. And I, I mean, it was probably the closest thing that I'd had to like a spiritual experience, up until that point. And yeah, and from there on, I was like, okay, there's clearly a lot about my emotional landscape that I just don't understand. And so I was in this like open, curious, receptive place. Um, and from there, I heard about a modality of breathwork that I was super curious about. I'd had one breathwork journey, and again, had had like a hugely emotional experience. And I was like, I'm gonna do this training, do this like 6-month training, and just commit myself to it. And
Mhm.
that was from a kind of realizing that the nervous system is the central thread. I think that's where that seed was planted. I realized over the course of doing this training, and like you mentioned, by hundreds of breathwork journeys, just like over and over again. And that, I mean, that probably more than anything else has like rewired my system,
Okay.
in so many ways, from like, um, having, and I'd say the main difference is, besides changing in just the way I breathe, having a, what I call emotional fluidity, where I'm still not perfect. I'm still have ways to go, but welcoming to a large degree the full spectrum of emotions as they come through, whether that's anger, whether it's shame, whether it's grief, whether it's helplessness, these things that like I had been running away from consciously or unconsciously for most of my life. The journey of like moving towards those feelings with courageous curiosity, and integrating them back into my psyche, that that became the work that I was obsessed with. And I realized that everything from meditation, breath work, to a lot of these practices, the nervous system was the central thread. The nervous system is literally the lens through which we experience reality. And if
Yeah.
I'm in one state, I will perceive you, I will perceive this office very differently, like literally compared to if I'm in a different state. And so, realizing that we have some agency over our state in each moment, we can kind of go from being triggered, depressed, shut down, anxious, to connected and calm and vibrant. And, even in this moment, there's like pain. We were talking before, there's pain in my left back. And I'm like, okay, there's pain here, but I can still remain connected and present in this conversation. Um,
Wow.
and yeah, I mean, I'm really rambling here, but it's like
Yeah,
the,
yeah. No, no, no. First of all, I appreciate the context, the backstory, and
Mhm.
I'm sorry that you had to go through that. In a way, I feel, and I'm I don't know if you've thought about this, but you approaching that bench, I wonder if, there was Sophie's energy there kind of welcoming you into this
Mm,
world in a way, like this whole new evolved world that is about to surface for you.
mm,
It's like almost felt like as you're sharing the story, it almost felt like like a portal opening in a way of like feeling the emotion. Because even
mm.
when you're speaking about going to visiting the locations that meant something to the two of you, I feel like that's the exact opposite that most people would do, right? They'd be like, "I can't go here, I can't go there because it's too painful,"
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But to feel through the emotion.
Yeah. Yeah, the line that I had in my mind was this sense of, like, she was really my first long-term partner, and she she taught me what it meant to love, and the sense was that now that she was gone and that her ashes were literally part of the world, that invitation was then to learn to fall in love with the world that she was now a part of, and that
Mm,
was kind of the lens through which I was viewing that process was like this kind of falling in love with the world that she had literally, like her atoms had literally become a part of. Um, yeah.
yeah. How do you think that experience has affected, I mean, your current marriage? And you opened up with,
Mm,
happily married and
mhm,
excited about, potentially becoming a father. I mean, have you thought about any of that? Like how you love today and how that may be different just from going through that experience?
mhm. Of course, yeah. It has, yeah. It's this strange paradox of if I could go back and like change in some way what happened, I would. And there is this profound gratitude for the journey of grief
Yeah.
and the way that it almost feels like it kind of carves out more capacity in my system to love, to be with
Mm.
intensity and to love. And there's no way, like I honestly believe this. There's no way that Kelly and I would have the marriage we do if I hadn't been through that process.
Yeah.
I was immature in many ways before, and I think this was like um, the first real thing that I had to go through, and it grew me in
Yeah.
really meaningful ways.
Well, you, but also thousands of others. If I think of your work and, even whether it's the course or the podcast, even, our conversation and some of the things we're speaking about, potentially collaborating on. I mean, the ripple effect of all of this has a lot of impact or potential impact. And I think we're humans. I mean, I think it's nice to be able to honor, someone like Sophie and honor your experience and how you went through it and, the work that you put in to do it in that way
Mm,
and kind of continue down our path. So,
mm,
um,
mm.
yeah, I want to say thanks. Yeah,
Oh,
in a way is what's coming to me.
I, yeah, I appreciate that, man. And yeah, and there is part of me as well that there's almost like an angry part that is like if people like Sophie and the hundreds of thousands of other people that take their lives every year in different circumstances, if they had access to some of the perspectives and tools that I've learned, I genuinely think the outcomes would be different and a lot of tragedy could be avoided. So I think that has also
Yeah,
been part of the motivation of like just feeling like this is important, and it
yeah.
needs to be out there.
Well, I think that's another area where we really overlap quite well. I mean, I haven't been through an experience like you've been through, but what's motivating me on the mental fitness side is I see and feel, and I've been a part of this as well, and I'm in and out of it, the
Mhm,
amount of mental torture that a lot of us are in and cycle in and out of and so forth. And to your point, there's so much available to us literally within a matter of seconds. And it
mm,
doesn't, I mean, I'm a big fan of full experiences. And, I know you've been on, in a dark room, I think for 10 days and there's silent retreats and so forth. But it literally within seconds, you can change your state with a question,
mm,
or gratitude flow, or as you mentioned, breathwork sequences. Like there's just so much that I just feel like having been through, my own struggles, like, compelled to, like,
mm,
we need to share this or talk about this because I just feel like as humans, we deserve to wake up feeling
mm,
good more days than not. It's
mhm,
not every day, but at least the majority. And if we look at the stats out there when it comes to mental health, it's definitely the opposite of that. And it's just sad, and I think we all suffer because of that because we can't possibly, think and innovate and be present and be, very loving parents if we're just like trapped in our minds. Just, I say this without judgment. It's just it's what it
mhm,
is. I know when I'm in it as well, where I'm like, I'm more edgy with my two boys and then have to kind of like pull out and be
mhm,
like, they don't deserve that. And,
mm,
and neither do I.
mm,
So let's reset. So
mm.
I would love to know because I can't remember if this was on Modern Wisdom or another show that I was saw you on in preparing for this, but you said something to the fact that over the I don't know what the time frame has been, but at least right now you've gotten yourself to a place where about 95% of what I would say kind of like your looping narrative or the mental hijacks are
Yeah.
not there anymore.
Mm.
Um, And I wanna say, like, maybe this will be the podcast title. It's like, how do we for once and for all put a stop to the unwanted looping narrative in our mind? Like, what's
Yeah, yeah,
what's
yeah.
worked for you?
Yeah, so I love this, and this is actually a question that I'm, like, really fascinated by right now, and I have some, like, I'll say flaming hot speculations from the frontiers of theoretical neuroscience, which I can share.
Sure. Okay.
Um, yeah, so I this came up recently. I interviewed a friend called River, and we talked about having had the same experience of both having had very critical, kind of like negative, voices in the head. For me, it was mostly in my teenage years and maybe early 20s. For him, it was late in his 20s. And for me, it was the kind of the 100 breathwork journeys where I didn't even notice, there wasn't like a day where it disappeared. There was just like a realization of like, "Oh, there's not that, like, background voice in my head anymore that's looping. It's just kind of gone." And River said the same thing after he'd done 3 months of Reggie Ray's somatic descent, which is pretty
Okay.
similar. It doesn't use the breath, but it's a similar kind of like getting into the body and, completing these incomplete reflexes. Um, my my hypothesis, and, I'm actually speaking to Michael Edward Johnson for the Curious Humans tomorrow about this specific question. He has a theory that he calls vasocomputation,
Okay.
and his idea, I might get a bit into the weeds here, but hopefully you can stay with me. He has this idea that every thought has a corresponding, tension that is held in the smooth muscle tissue. This is kind of the hypothesis,
Okay.
and that this tension, um, both restricts blood flow and it is, held in place by what he calls latch mechanisms, and that by creating, confusing states for the body that throw in prediction errors. So, like breath work is an example where you have significant changes to your blood chemistry and the body doesn't really know what's going on. And so, the latches that have been adaptive strategies since we've been young, right, to kind of, protect us from
Yeah.
keeping the belonging and the love of our caregivers, those latches in conditions of sufficient safety and presence can get released. And
Sure.
so for me, there were dozens and dozens of these like wild kind of physical journeys in breathwork where like my arms would be moving all over the place. There'd be releases in my hips, my psoas, the breath would be moving. And my theory, and I'd love to try and design some experiments with Mike to try and add more like weight to this. But my theory is that all of those, like every time that kind of critical voice in the head appears, if you really tune in, there is a corresponding physical tension somewhere in the body. Like it might be like a tightness in the gut, it might be something in the chest, it might be numbness, there's some
Yeah.
kind of like correlation. And if you were able to, again, create conditions of safety and to kind of, instead of pushing away that kind of negative experience, to kind of allow it and go into it and almost treating it like an exiled part, if you've seen kind of Inside Out 2, like giving it a hug or like bringing that part back into your psyche, back into your system, then the the strategy it has been using to get your attention, these kind of like critical things, my belief, my hypothesis is that that will fade as this latch is released and that
As you
part
train your mind, yeah.
is reintegrated. That is my current hypothesis.
Okay.
I'm very keen to test it and to speak to more people that have had this experience as well.
Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of following the intuition and whatnot, and it just logically also makes sense. And there's no downside to testing that. That's the other thing I find with this kind of work in general. I mean, for the
Mm,
most part, there isn't a downside. I mean, obviously, you can go down to extremes, and you've got to be careful with, things like psychedelics, and frankly, even some of these psychedelic-ish breathwork sequences. I've never done one of those,
mhm.
but
Yep.
I'm running a whole series on demystifying psychedelics right now, so we're learning a lot
Oh, fascinating. I didn't know
on
that.
that topic. Yeah, I'll share a little bit more later, but
Mm,
um, that makes sense. So then, practically speaking, how do we do this? It's like a thought comes up, and I'll use myself as an example. As I do have these, and it's the thing that I'm most curious about trying to, and I'd love to be part of your experiment because selfishly, it almost feels at times that I almost feel sometimes like a hypocrite because here I am studying these practices day in and day
mm,
out and using them myself. And the line I want to use my own mind is like, you have all the tools, but it still feels very hard.
mm, mm,
And like, are you the only one that feels like this? Even though I feel the benefits when delivering the work or working with teams and so forth, but there's an element to me of like,
mhm,
shouldn't feel so damn hard, with
mm,
like this some of these narratives that flow. And you almost like being part of this work, you're so much more self-aware. It's like
yeah.
almost worse in a way, right? Like, oh,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
only I could be numbed out a little bit more.
And then the voice kinda chimes in with, "You're a hypocrite," which then, like, adds
Yeah,
more fuel to the fire of, like
yeah.
and,
So
like, the
what should
shit.
I do? What should I do? It would be in that moment. I'm a huge fan about breath work as well, but is
Mhm,
one strategy to just kinda take a pause, close the eyes, take a few breaths, and, like, really try to do, almost a body scan or connect with yourself to see
mhm,
if you feel anything linked to that emotion, or is there something else you would suggest?
mhm. Yeah, so there are, let's see, what's a good starting point? So in any moment when you notice there's some kind of trigger or a looping thought or something, I think of there being like two different, well, there's three different, but top down or bottom up approaches. A top down approach is, I think, what you've really dedicated your life to around questions that might offer a reframe or different perspectives or affirmations or seeing how this could actually be serving you. All of the different
Yeah,
mental moves that you can make to really, meaningfully change your state. The second approach is bottom up, which is changing your physiology so that you send signals to your brain through your afferent neurons from your body that it's actually safe. So that can be things
mm,
like 4-4-8 breathing, humming is surprisingly effective,
yeah, I wanted to
um,
talk to you about that.
relaxing the gaze. Huberman calls it optic flow, where there's just like you're kind of softening the gaze, even more in inhabiting your back body. This is more of an awareness practice, but like noticing and like breathing into the back of your chest and noticing that there is space behind you actually creates more expansiveness, which also helps with the process. So when I teach this, there are, I think, 3 distinct skills that are helpful to learn, and they really should be learned in order to some degree as well. The first is known as interoception, which is, and for me, this was big in the beginning because I really didn't have any felt sense of my own body really, which sounds weird, but, like, I just wasn't aware of what was going on a lot of the time. So, tuning in and noticing that that actually is, let's say, a tension or a tightness or something present. The second are the strategies for self-regulation, which is another way of saying that is like creating sufficient safety in your system, both internally and externally. Because
Okay.
safety is really what allows the system to soften. You can say whatever you want, but if your body is feeling unsafe, it will still be in that kind of fight, flight, contracted
Yeah.
mode.
So this could be, some affirmations in your mind, like, "I am safe, I am"
Mhm.
I'm not under threat, like, just acknowledging that in this present moment, all is well,
Yeah.
even though it may feel like it's not.
Yeah, and acknowledging, from, more of, like you said, like a witness perspective of witnessing whatever the thing is, but not fully associating with that. So you have some, like,
Yeah,
psychological distance between whatever the thing is and your ability to witness it.
yeah,
Um, and then the third piece, and this is where I think you're able to potentially get to the root of wherever that kind of voice is coming from, is this attitude of like welcoming and embracing without a change agenda. And I think that this was a thing that took me so
oh,
long to
wow,
learn. And I have to credit Steve March for this, the founder of Alethea. But I realized that I'd been like doing my internal explorations with a change agenda. It was like I was like going in to feel the thing so that it would like bugger off basically, so that it would go
yeah,
away. And that was actually creating even more resistance in the way that I was doing it. So I love the way that Joe Hudson explains this, which is like imagine you are imagine a kid runs through the door that is, like, sad or angry. Like, you wouldn't just, like, accept it and, like, let it come you really would, like, welcome it and give it a hug and, thank you for being here and thank you for whatever it is. And so I think that I actually like the image of, like, imagining that there's, like, a small part of you that is just upset or hurt and just,
yeah,
like, really giving it, like, a big embrace, um, and and then trusting
and
the
then
wi
just allowing you sorry, yeah, that's what you're about to say, yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, just trusting the wisdom of the body, and the more that I do this work, and this took me a long time to figure out, but, like, it's like getting out of the way. It's like we have so many strategies of getting in our own way, but when we can just truly kind of surrender, it sounds cliche, it's kind of the same in psychedelic journeys as well, then the body and the nervous system knows what to do to reintegrate and almost, like, reharmonize and, like, come back into tune
yeah.
if we can soften enough to allow that to happen.
Well, I feel like that's where the mental fitness reps come into play because we're surrounded by the opposite philosophy with everything else all the time around, like, there's always an agenda, there's
Yep.
like, even thinking of these kind of conversations, I mean, I do my best to just flow with you and the other guests, but
Mhm.
it's like, there's some topics that I've already kind of planned out that I'd love to hit on,
Yeah.
and,
It is
like,
interesting.
it's kind of the training around I mean, I have to follow it myself of just I've already thought about all of this,
Mm,
I feel pretty confident in knowing enough of your background. Now it's just all about being fully present and
yeah.
just trusting the flow of the conversation, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Which I think can apply in beautiful ways in kind of all things in life. It's just, again, the default is not necessarily that. And I think just to give ourselves some credit, and not judge ourselves and approach kind of the way you're describing this a practice to help in these unwanted narratives is just to acknowledge that we probably will have some change agendas at the beginning, but just
Yes.
constantly just try to let
Mm,
that go, right?
yeah. Yes,
Then
yes,
it
yes.
becomes hopefully intuitive on the other side. Yeah,
Yeah, so that I mean, that's another thing, and that also happened to me as well, of where, like, judgment would come in of like, "Oh, I am actually," and then, like, judgment on the judgment, and you get in these, like, in these cycles. And the move is, um well, yeah, actually what's coming to mind is, I love the poet David Whyte, and he has this
yeah,
poem that he calls "Take the First Step, not the second or the third. The first step, the one that you don't wanna take." And
hmm
in the context of what we're speaking about, that means so let's say if I was doing that and I noticed that I was judging myself for having a change agenda, then it would be applying the kind of, like, loving presence and welcoming to the part of me that is judging myself for having the change agenda. And you almost just kind of, like, trickle down through the layers. But it really is a case of starting with whatever's there, and if you're having resistance to the resistance, then that's where you start. That's just where you begin. That's where you're
just
at.
start. Yeah. What are some other I remember that when you said as soon as you said top up and or top down, bottom up, I was like, "Oh, yeah, that was the total." Because it's true, like, I feel like I use mental fitness or questions
Mhm.
as the means to pause the autopilot, and
Mm,
even for myself, I feel like this is where I'm at, and this is where I really do think kind of the intuitiveness or the serendipity of the universe or whatever you want to call it, like you've been brought into my life and we've been introduced because I feel like I'm ready for that next stage of bottom up.
Mm,
Um, Thankfully, because of some of those mental fitness practices, being able to pause and reframe and so forth, but feel like I need to go a little bit deeper.
mhm,
And there, there's a nice kind of integration there. So I'd love to know a little bit more, some other kind of bottom up scenarios that have, or practices or things that have helped you,
mhm.
um, really shift and evolve on your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the ones that have been most powerful have been, for the kind of, like, in the moment situations. I remember before going on stage to give a TEDx talk, which was my first, like, big public presentation, and I was terrified. I was
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
terrified. I did
It was a good
10
talk. I
minutes.
watched it.
Thank you, thank
Yeah.
you. There was actually a pause for, like, 25 seconds in the middle when I forgot what to say, and at the end, I remember someone came up to me and said, "That pause that you did, it was just so powerful." Like, well, I
Yeah, I
was
was gonna
like,
say I didn't
"No, I just
notice the
forgot what to
pause.
say."
Funny.
Um, yeah, so I've really appreciated the alternate nostril breathing and the humming, particularly
Yeah.
for
Talk to
in
us
the
more about the humming.
yeah, so it's basically, I mean, it's so simple. You can either just close your mouth and just like hum, or
Yep.
if you want to amplify it, you can. The yogis have this thing called bee breath, where for people that are watching the video, you put your two, or not watching the video, you put your two fingers over the eyes, ring finger over the nose, and then thumbs in the ears, and that basically just amplifies the vibration effect of the
Okay.
hum. And something about the vibrations in the sinus cavities hugely increases nitric oxide by like 15-fold, which is a vasodilator. And it also, I believe, it stimulates the vagus nerve. So there's like vagal nerve toning going on. But it just feels amazing. And I feel like my eye fatigue also goes away if I've been looking at screens for too long.
Okay.
So that's just like that's like an absolute go-to for like an in the moment, like if anxious, then hum, kind of like
Yeah.
straight, like very practical, can do it almost anywhere. I
How
sometimes do
long
it
do
in
you
public.
do it, Johnny?
I will do it for between like 5 and 10 like full breaths. Oh, and the other thing is it's important to breathe all the way to the end of your exhale. So until you feel the air going like all the way out of your lungs. And
Okay.
having that extended exhale also increases the parasympathetic
Yeah.
effect, so to speak. So you're getting both the
Okay.
hum and the extended exhale, which are stimulating the parasympathetic system, which is our kind of and often so maybe a more precise answer is wait until you notice like a yawn or a sigh or like a like there's like a way in which your
Yeah.
system just like relaxes that is a literal physical signal that your
Yeah.
body is downshifting. And so kind of do it until you notice that, and maybe you'll like squint your eyes and your eyes will like maybe you'll yeah yawn. Like even right now, I feel like a little tension in my jaw here. Um, yeah, and so that's like these days that's my go-to. Incredibly simple,
Okay.
and can be done literally anywhere. Um, then
Well,
the
just
the other
sorry, just on that before you move on, just on the
yeah,
humming, like again, all of this stuff, I can't wait to really, I'm gonna try that myself. But it's just like when you start to think about these little intuitive nudges that we get around, like to your point, like the sigh, like the
mm,
built-in
mm, mm,
software that we already have in
yeah,
our body.
yeah,
It's like, whoa,
exactly.
like there's a reason it's there. And
Yeah.
I also, I mean, I mentioned it earlier about the psychedelic series. So my co-host is been studying for the last, I think, 10, 12 years to achieve to get a PhD essentially in psychedelic medicine. Um, Spent a ton of time with tribes in various cultures and whatnot. And the
Mm,
last time I spoke to him, I was fascinated, but he was explaining the last experience he went through, and he was talking about the power of the like the song, right?
yeah,
And like the
yeah,
shaman singing and so forth. And he's like, I didn't even understand the language, but it makes me think of again the power of the vibrations
mhm,
that, of how we, listen to, sounds and so forth. And, he was almost saying, he's like, there are times where we weren't on any psychedelics and it was
mhm,
just the ritual and that experience. And I think obviously the shared energy and so forth, but it's just like, again, coming back to like the basics of our human makeup, like there's so
mm,
much there that we can tap
mhm.
into.
Mhm.
right? Humming. I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, I love that, and you can even there's another version that I call "voo hum," which is where you make the sound "voo" and then hum, and the "voo" sound vibrates more in, like, the lower diaphragm, in
Okay.
that area, and that's an alternative, and, yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, and I sometimes think of, like, if, like, a big pharmaceutical company were to create a pill that had the same effect that this, 30 seconds of humming has, they would make an absolute killing, or a device that, beeped every time there was, like, some little tension in our body and that we needed to
Yeah.
kind of tune inwards, that was just like it's our interoception, like, we have it. We have all of the biological hardware, it's just, no one ever gave us I think about this, like, a how to human manual of, like, these are the kind of levers that you can pull to, like, operate this
Yeah.
human that we're all driving.
Yeah, it's so true. We've just kind of been placed in the driver's seat without a manual.
Yeah.
It's like, just figure it out,
Exactly,
right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Is Do you have any go-tos when it comes to what I would call preventative mental fitness or practices that you do consistently to just either train awareness or, well, frankly, everything we've been talking about just to augment, that power?
Yeah, so what I've been really nerding out on recently is, a form of meditation called the jhanas. I
Okay.
did a retreat with them. I was actually my photo was on one of the Time magazine covers because I was like this like guy meditating in the front, which is kind of funny. But they are a couple of former engineers who are basically taking a engineered kind of like self-experimental approach to reverse engineering what are known as jhana states. And
How
I've
do you
been
spell
so
that just so I can write put that in the show notes?
Jhana.
AJ.
I feel like my if I was to make a prediction, I would say that jhana practice will overtake traditional mindful meditation in the next 5 years because um, it's just it's so effective. There's the way they describe it is by activating the feedback loop between attention and emotion. So
Okay.
in the same way that when you have a panic attack, there's that fear or anxiety that's looping in like an increasingly intense way. You can do the same with joy and gratitude. So you
Mm,
do some loving kindness practice, you notice that those good feelings of gratitude or compassion or well-being, and then you direct your attention to that, and then you amplify it in a feedback loop, and it creates
yeah.
like a panic attack for joy. And I and many other people on this retreat, some of them were first-time meditators. They experienced these jhana states. There's 4 was it there's 8 of them, but 4, uh there's 4 jhanas in the beginning. Um, and it feels like it's like ecstasy, honestly. And I from the perspective of nervous system mastery, I think there's something so, essential and healing about increasing our capacity to feel joy and pleasure and gratitude and these good feelings. Because in many ways, and for many people, they can be scarier than feeling the negative things. And so having a
Yeah.
practice, and, it likely will just start off with some kind of, felt sense gratitude practice. This can then be accelerated through self-experimentation into these jhana feedback loops. And
Okay.
there's, I'll just keep sharing because I think for me, I find it fascinating. But
Yeah, yeah.
there's 4 jhanas, and I associated each 4 with different centers in my body. So the first one was, like, up in my head. It felt like almost like rapture, like bliss. The second one was in my heart, and that was like, um just incredible, like, connect it there was a good analogy that I think Steven, the teacher, made of, like, in a relationship of, like, the first John is, like, when you first fall in love, you're just, like, sex, and you're, like, yeah, I don't know, about to have sex or
Yeah.
something. The
Yeah.
second is, like, when you're lying in bed, maybe, like, spooning, and it's early in the relationship, and your entire body's just, like, on fire with this, like, good feeling of, like, fresh love. The third is much more of, like, a deep contentment, maybe just before you're about to fall asleep. And then the fourth, which I experienced almost like in the root of my body, kind of like pelvic floor area. And this was like an incredible equanimity and spaciousness. It was almost like free diving down into a completely still, serene space where there was this like deep okayness was present.
Oof. Sign me up for that.
Yeah, right.
I want on that subscription plan.
Right, and so, I mean, I was really blown away, and I'm a huge supporter of what these guys are doing, but
Okay. I'm
knowing
gonna
that
look it up, yeah.
they've been able to get first-time meditators into these states, uh, I think, like, 60 to 70% of the time, and so I'm a huge fan of combining something like that as, like, a daily practice to increase our capacity to literally feel good and feel pleasure with some of the other practices, whether it's humming, whether it's, um alternate nostril breathing. Playing with awareness is another really fun one to try.
Okay.
My friend Michael Ashcroft teaches this, and it's drawn from the Alexander technique, if people have heard of that. But the idea is, in any moment, we have our attention and our awareness. So my attention is kind of on you, but my awareness is in this moment, I'm like aware of the room around me. I'm like aware of the ceiling above me and the
Yeah.
books and plants behind me. And that spaciousness creates this like it subtle changes in posture and a sense of like ease that is different than if I like were to contract my awareness and make it very narrow, which is what happens when we get stressed. And
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is when I'm kind of doing it now where there's this like tightness starts to form in my body. And then I'm like, oh, just like, so you can kind of play with how is my awareness? Or when you're talking, like we're doing right now, I could put all of my awareness on you and be kind of like noticing everything that I'm picking up from you. And then I can take it back and have all my awareness on my body. I'm like, okay, what are the oh, yeah, I feel my back, I feel my butt on the seat, and just,
Yeah, yeah.
like, playing with that in any moment, and what I love about that is you can do it when no one else knows you're doing it, and you can just, like, have fun at dinner parties, at conversations, if you're in a queue, you can just play with it. It's really, really
Yeah.
powerful.
I f it's in I mean, maybe I have the wrong perspective on this, but what's coming to mind for me is where the beauty lies of this, again, back to your terminology of top down, bottom up, the combination of
Yep.
having these tools working in parallel together, because a lot of what you've been describing the last few minutes to me, I think automatically like beautiful practices feels like you definitely need a lot of intentionality and focus in some capacity to do that. And
Mhm,
if people's minds, and myself included, are like jammed full in the moment,
mhm,
not impossible, but probably hard to do that. Whereas if you can bring in some other, even if you just, few rounds of breath work to just like clear out and blow out some, some mental clutter, mental debt, and then drop into these other practices, like you
mhm.
just get so much more out of it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's that's what's exciting. I feel like the excitement of the combination of stacking different practices and
Mhm,
designing different flows for different use cases. Like you said, for this new meditation or this meditation practice that it'll probably be everywhere in the next 5 to 10 years. I think the same thing for mental fitness. Like right now, yeah, I'm sure with people you're speaking with, definitely the leaders and teams I work with, it's very much a competitive advantage right now,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
personally and professionally. But I
Mm.
I can't see a world where it's not just the norm, because I feel like we'll cease to exist. Like we're just gonna melt down as humans because we're you can see how fragile people's minds are right now.
Yeah.
Like something has to change,
Yeah, no,
right?
I totally agree with you, and there is I mean, excuse me. In my experience and in a lot of the people I've worked with, often it takes a certain degree of like suffering, honestly, to really
Yeah,
get people to be motivated to want to learn some of these things and to change the
yeah,
way that they've been orienting. The other practice that I wanted to mention that has been hugely helpful for me is non-sleep deep rest or yoga nidra.
yeah.
And I'm so passionate about this that I'm designing an app with a friend of mine to just give people guided sessions. And especially if you're someone that can work from home. Like, I will do this for 15, 20 minutes after lunch. It's like, you lie down, you kind of do some brief breathing practices and then a body scan, and
Mhm.
it flushes cortisol, it increases interoception. It just allows me to, like, feel rejuvenated.
Yeah,
I'm designing a video right now, and the analogy that I have is, like, if you have, like a heart meter, like in a video game, and you get to, like, after lunch and you're, like, 2 out of 10 hearts, you do an
yeah,
NSDR and it gets you back up to, like, 8 out of
totally.
10, and
W
it's just, like, really
without
recharging.
shocking, without Red Bull or Monster in there,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, exactly, which feels like stealing energy from your future self, because like, it will give you energy, but then you
Yeah.
feel you have the crash and the come down. So,
Yeah, yeah, totally. And it's just, again, the kind of emphasizing the fact that, I mean, 10, 15, I've been playing with this actually the last 3 weeks myself. And
oh, cool.
definitely can attest to what you're saying around the energy
Awesome.
boosts and so forth. And I find I've been doing it as well, kind of the last thing I do before I go to sleep. And
Mm,
it's been really calming and just calming down the
yeah.
mind and just really
Have you
tapping
have
in.
you found that you wake up in a better state as well? Like, I notice if I do it before bed and then I fall asleep in that, like, hypnagogic state, I wake up feeling like almost like I've just done, like, a 30-minute meditation. It's
Mm.
really it's really nice.
Well, I feel that in the day, definitely in
Mhm.
the afternoon, like, as if I took a power nap for,
Mm,
good 30 minutes, 30, 40 minutes. Uh, Evening, that's good. I'm gonna play with that, and I'm gonna see. I mean, I wear a Whoop, so,
yeah.
I'd be curious to see how that affects. I haven't been intentional about it. I've been I'm not consistent. I'm kind of, as needed right now and experimenting, so I there's not
Totally.
much I can report that on that one. The thing that has given me the most alertness, and I'd say waking up fresh, has been mouth taping when sleeping.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
been I actually to the point my wife, I mean, it started because, I was snoring in the bed, and then I started
Uh-huh.
to listen. I think it was, Stephen Bartlett had James Nestor on,
Oh, yeah.
the author of Breathe, and it was like, "Okay, yeah, I wanna shut down the snoring." There's clear,
Mhm,
problems with that when it comes to your health and so forth, but then he goes much further around. Actually, there's a whole bunch of other things that are not good for your like, the cleaning of your body and your mind and
mhm,
so forth, and that was the real motivator for me.
mhm.
Took a few days, I would say, of not feeling like I was a hostage of some sort, and now I almost can't sleep without it. Like, if I, for some reason, tape comes off or something like that, or if I forget, I'm like, "No, no, no, like, I've gotta do something." It's like it almost feels like a bit of a safety blanket, like, comforting
Mhm.
in a way at this point. It's interesting.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, my wife and I have this, like, little sweet bedtime routine where one of
You
us will
tape
do the
each other's
tape and
mouth.
we'll do, like, goodnight kiss and then put the put the
The
tape on.
tape, yeah, yeah.
But,
It's true,
I
I've started doing that too because I
it
was
it
like,
took me a while to realize that, initially, I used to have, like, quite thick tape that went all the way across horizontally, but now
"Okay.
we just use, like, a very thin strip of medical tape vertically, and that
Yep,
does the
same."
job without feeling like I'm, like, literally, like I can't breathe.
Yeah, exactly. This is where we lost all the listeners, like, "These guys are insane.
These
Just
guys are
try it."
nuts.
I was like you too. I was like, "I don't think so," but I've converted a good amount of my family members. I'm like, "You
Oh,
gotta try
cool.
this. You feel so good." Alright, man. Well, I've already taken a lot of your time, and we definitely could continue for hours, and maybe we'll have to have another round at one point, but,
Mm,
A, I wanna, again, thank you for making time to come on the show and bring back that thanks of just, being vulnerable yourself, going to places that, initially felt, very painful and hard to process and sticking with it and being curious and
mm,
coming to the point where you have all these practices and this new knowledge and you're still learning, you're still asking questions and helping a lot of people. I mean, I have a huge list of notes and things I personally want to try. So I can't imagine everyone on the other side of this conversation as well that there's something that was left in today's conversation, and that's largely because you've put your mind and your nervous system first in many cases, so that you can help a lot of other people. So thank you for that.
mm. Well, thank you, Mark. Yeah, I really feel like the sincerity in your approach and your questions, and yeah, I really hope that we continue to kind of deepen our friendship. I feel a lot of kinship in just who you are and how you're navigating the world. So thank you.
Mm.